Good evening again. My name is Arlene Kush. I'm the Outreach Program Specialist for the Special Projects Branch Environmental Project Team for FUSERAP and FUDS. For tonight's meeting, I have a few operating principles to go over with you before we get started, but I want to tell you about the bathrooms are on my right, your left. The emergency exits are in the back of the room. There's two, and then there's one by the door that you came in. And if you could please turn off your cell phones, please listen respectfully, please hold questions or comments until the poster session or the workshop discussions. I will now introduce John Bussey, the Program Manager for Niagara Falls Storage Site in the Lake Ontario Ordnance Works.
Thanks, Arlene. She already introduced me, so I don't think I have to introduce myself again, but I'd like to introduce the team if I could. We got Jane Staten, she's the project engineer for Niagara Falls Storage Site. Michelle Barker, she's the regional technical specialist at the Corps. Natalie Watson, she's part of the outreach team with Arlene. Jim Stokowski, he'll be the new project engineer for the Lake Ontario Ordnance Works. Mick Sanos, he's the project manager for the low projects. We got Bill Kovaleski, he's the chief of the special project branch. Also have Paul Giardina from the US EPA. Mr. Frederick, Bill Frederick over there. He's the environmental project management team leader. We got Steve Bousquet, environmental health team leader. Karen Kyle, our risk assessor. Hank Spector, our health physicist back there.
No one ever introduced me before.
Yeah, somebody had to. I think that's everybody, right? Did I miss anybody? And I think we got everybody outnumbered again. So I'll get started. If we can hit the next slide. Kind of going to walk you through the Building 401 dismantlement. And we're calling it dismantlement because that's basically what we're doing, more so than an actual demolition. Then we'll get into the remedial investigation feasibility study update and also what's next in Niagara Falls storage site. And then we'll break into that where Mick Sanos will pick up and he'll do the Lewiston Porter school property sampling update as well as a further updates on the low project which was requested by the community. And then Paul Giardina will close it out with a presentation. Also like to mention we did receive a request from the community to add a discussion of transparency to the agenda. If the community wants to discuss this topic, we can broach that subject during the discussion portion of tonight's activities. Next slide. Okay, so I'm going to walk you through a brief history of Building 401, State Historic Preservation Office requirements, and a brief overview of the demolition or dismantling of Building 401. Next slide. I know many of you are probably familiar with the site, but for those who are not, I'm just going to go through a real brief history of Building 401. This is a 1944 photograph. You can see Building 401 is annotated there. NFSS, as everyone probably knows, is located 1397 Fletcher Road in Lewiston, New York. The site is owned by the federal government. The site consists of an engineered 10-acre interim waste containment structure, various buildings, and open areas. It was originally part of the Low site, and the primary use of the site from the early 40s to mid-50s was for storage of radioactive waste from various sources. Building 401 was initially the powerhouse for the production of TNT at the former Low, and it was also used to store radioactive materials in support of Manhattan Engineering District activities during World War II. Additionally, it was used for the production of boron-10 from 1953 to 1959 and from 1965 to 1971. And then subsequently thereafter became a storage facility used by the Atomic Energy Commission and the Department of Energy. In 1971, Building 401 was gutted and its instrumentation, equipment, and hardware were disposed of as surplus materials. The building's been largely inactive since, primarily occupied by animals, raccoons, turkey vultures, etc. In 95 through 97, Building 401 went through a decontamination effort as well as a comprehensive survey and sampling. And in the summer of 2002, an asbestos abatement was performed on the interior of the structure. Next slide. State Historic Preservation Office. Building 401 was determined eligible by the New York State Preservation Office for listing in the National Register of Historic Places. You got a couple of pictures there showing the dilapidated structure of the building. It was agreed upon between the Corps and the SHPO that Building 401 currently poses a safety hazard to site workers and to Corps and other agency personnel. Additionally, although Building 401 is currently structurally stable, the deteriorated state of the building, localized areas of contamination, and its location on an active FUSERAP site warrant demolition of the building and not reuse or rehabilitation. So in accordance with Section 106 of the National Preservation Act, the Corps and the State Historic Preservation Office entered into a memorandum of agreement on March 1st, 2010. And in consultation with the SHPO, the Corps will document Building 401 through Historic American Building Survey, Historic American Engineering Record Level 2, which is shown on the slide, and that's a mouthful to say. Photographic documentation and accompanying narrative in accordance with the Secretary of the Interior's guidelines for architectural and engineering documentation will be developed for this building. Basically 3 sets of black and white photographs, 1 set of negatives. We'll record the interior, the exterior of the building, as well as document the history of this building, especially as it related to the war effort in World War II. We'll also prepare a time-lapse video, which will show how the building was demoed. We'll present that, post that on our website for everyone to see. And finally, we'll include a historic interpretation of Building 401 through plaques and markers. And we'll post that on the site for everyone. Next. Okay, I'm going to walk you through demolition of Building 401 quickly, hopefully briefly, and I won't put you to sleep. The photographs here show the interior of Building 401 on the left and the northeast corner of the exterior of the building there. Presently, this contract to demolish or dismantle Building 401 was awarded to Terraneer and Energy Solutions, which is a joint venture, and we basically refer to them as TES. They have subcontracted to a local contractor called Demco, who's been responsible for dismantling or demolishing the Memorial Auditorium, Yankee Stadium, as well as several DOE facilities. They're a local company. We're using stimulus funds to get this work completed, and as a result, using a local firm was definitely advantageous to us, so we're happy that TES selected them as their subcontractor. Services reported on the scope of work involve characterization, demolition, packaging, and disposal of Building 401 in accordance with applicable local, state, and federal regulatory requirements. There will be removal abatement precautions to control waste streams such as bird and animal waste, which is prevalent throughout the building. There's potential asbestos in the transite paneling on the exterior of the building. There's lead-based paint, obviously, on the interior surfaces within the building. There's miscellaneous debris. There's contaminated structural elements in concrete, including the sumps and drains, which will be pumped, characterized, and then filled prior to any demolition occurring. TES is currently preparing the work plans. We hope to be able to release those to the community sometime towards the end of July for your input prior to them getting on site. The work plans that they're going to prepare include the site operations plan, there'll be a demolition plan, a site safety health plan, waste management, transportation, and disposal plan, and engineering and structural survey. And I think I touched on them all. Mobilization will be completed sometimes toward the end of August, at which time TES and their subcontractors will begin the pre-demolition activities. Pre-demolition work will be comprised of the following activities. They'll do an asbestos survey of the exterior and selected interior areas, establishment of debris stockpile areas, radiological survey of work areas and building contents, of course plugging of drains and sumps after removal of liquids, which I already mentioned, inventory of hazardous materials within the building, development of drawings showing all the utilities, and waste profile sheets for all waste streams. Additional pre-demolition activities will include quantification and identification of hazardous materials, including lead, light ballast, mercury, sodium vapor lights, capacitors, and thermostats, which will all be removed prior to demolition, as well as the windows. They'll treat the bird and animal waste. They'll remove the potential ACM material, whether it's in the interior or exterior, wrapping it in 6 mil poly and disposing of it accordingly. There'll be a comprehensive survey, radiological survey of the interior of the building and the exterior of the building. And also, I'd like to mention the soils around the building, 401, will be covered with geotextile fabric and stone to prevent migration or impact to any soils surrounding the work area. Next. And then we'll get to the demolition. The photograph shown on here is a project that we did at Lindy Fuse Wrap site. We basically dismantled the building. We're going to follow the same procedure at 401. It worked there. It should work very well here. TES will complete the demolition of building 401 and the attached silos by the end of the calendar year is what it's currently scheduled to be. Concrete floor slab will remain. TES does intend on recycling the majority of steel within this building, but in order for them to recycle any materials within the state, as well as dispose of any materials in the landfill within the state, they have to radiologically survey the debris, the steel, and verify that it's at background conditions in order to comply with 6 NYCRR Part 380 and Part 360 requirements. I got that right, Steve? Dust control measures will also be implemented to prevent the spread of contamination and maintain particular level of permissible exposure level specified in OSHA regulations. The dust control program will consist of both dust suppression measures and ambient air monitoring to verify the success of the dust suppression. Air monitoring will be at all 4 quadrants, north, south, east, and west, and will be on continuously. We'll also wet the demolition equipment in active demolition areas, cover waste debris, hauling waste debris in covered or closed containers, keep vehicle speeds low, and apply water spray during debris handling and to unpaved vehicle access routes as necessary. All wastewater will be diverted and contained. There'll be berms set up around the demolition. Basically, we don't want anything getting out of the box here. Basically, and kind of as the picture showed, Demco is basically the way they're going to do it. They're going to start at the top once they have the complete building characterized, so they know where all the waste streams are going to go. They're going to segregate it after they pull it down. They're going to start at the top, and they're going to work their way to the bottom, set up piles. Radiological here, PCBs here, VOCs there, and then they'll transport it to an according facility. At the completion of the construction, they'll perform surveys, radiological surveys, both at the slab area as well as at least 15 meters outside any work areas to verify that nothing gets out of the box. They'll demobilize all equipment from the site, clean up the site as necessary, and provide a final report documenting demolition activities, including sample and survey results, which we'll make available to the public. And next slide, we'll kind of walk through the schedule. Basically, this is the current schedule the way it stands. Work plans, we anticipate getting to the community by late July 2010. They're going to mobilize probably more towards the late August 2010. Conduct a pre-demolition activity as shown there. They'll go through the removal and abatement of the miscellaneous waste. This includes the ACM, anything they find like ballast, etc. Demolition will start in late October and proceed through December. And then they'll complete the post-demolition activities and the surveys early December through mid-January 2011 with a final project report provided by March 2011. At this time, I'd like to introduce Michelle Barker, and she'll provide you with an update on Niagara Falls Storage Site remedial investigation.
All right, thanks, John. As John said, my name is Michelle Barker, and I'll be providing an update tonight on the remedial investigation and feasibility study for the Niagara Falls Storage Site. Next. The goal of the remedial investigation that was conducted on Niagara Falls Storage Site between 1999 and 2003 was to define the nature and extent of radiological and chemical contamination resulting from the historic Manhattan Engineer District and Atomic Energy Commission operations, and to evaluate potential risks to human health and the environment. As discussed at the public meeting last June, findings from the Niagara Falls Storage Site are highlighted on this slide. After the remedial investigation report for the Niagara Falls Storage Site was published in December of 2007, the Corps received 335 comments. In 2009, the Corps conducted additional fieldwork to prepare an addendum to the RI to address data gaps and these comments. The Corps is concurrently preparing documentation in support of the feasibility study for the interim waste containment structure to examine a variety of options to address the potential long-term risks associated with the cell. To ensure the protectiveness of human health and the environment in the interim, the Corps is committed to maintaining the site operations and environmental surveillance program on site. Next slide. A majority of the 334 comments received from the public on the remedial investigation report can be categorized into 5 areas of interest that you can see on the slide. This presentation will generally discuss each of these topics and how they will be addressed in the remedial investigation addendum, which is currently under development and is scheduled for public release by the end of this calendar year. The first topic of interest in the remedial investigation addendum is the potential sources of groundwater contamination near the interim waste containment structure. The concern with groundwater contamination near the IWCS boundary is the ability to distinguish whether the IWCS is performing as designed. The left figure is actually figure 2-3 in the chemical characterization report prepared by Bechtel National in December of 1991. In this report, Bechtel highlights areas of known contamination in 1981 prior to the construction of the cell, which closely resemble total uranium concentration in groundwater measured over 25 years later to the right. The final report on the comprehensive characterization and hazard assessment of the DOE, conducted by Bechtel in June of 1981, states the area, referring to the R10 area highlighted in the figure to your left, has been fairly unstable, eroding east to the central drainage ditch and eroding west onto the area west of the site into the west ditch. Also, this area is underlain by one or more saturated zones, creating potential for subsurface migration to off-site areas. The most likely source of groundwater contamination near the IWCS is historic leaching from the R10 pile prior to the construction of the IWCS. The R10 pile was open to the elements from 1946 through 1982. That's for over 36 years. The R10 pile now is located inside the waste containment structure along with the other wastes and residues. However, current groundwater contamination near the IWCS, demonstrated by the figure on the right, closely mimics the documented location of contamination in 1981, the figure on the left, prior to the construction of the IWCS. The Corps is committed to closely monitoring groundwater contamination near the IWCS as part of the ongoing environmental surveillance program. One data gap identified during the remedial investigation was the potential for groundwater contaminants to migrate off-site. Highlighted in this slide are general areas of interest with the greatest potential for off-site groundwater migration, which were identified at the public workshop last June. The primary groundwater contaminant having the greatest potential for off-site migration was uranium. However, chemical contamination also had the potential to migrate off-site in the rightmost area highlighted. To address this data gap, during the remedial investigation addendum work, 23 temporary wells, identified in blue, were installed. Of these 25 wells, 10 wells, which are identified in red, were made permanent based on initial findings such as quick turnaround analytical results from the laboratory and radiological and chemical screening, and the rest were sampled and closed. Preliminary results based on a single sampling event indicate that uranium contamination in groundwater exists off-site, but only slightly above the US EPA Safe Drinking Water Act standard. The Corps is assessing which of these newly installed wells should be incorporated into the environmental surveillance program for monitoring to ensure the protection of human health and the environment during this investigation. Next slide. The third topic of interest for the remedial investigation addendum was the potential for contaminated groundwater to enter ditches on Niagara Falls storage site. To address this comment in the RIR addendum, the following approaches were taken. Uranium in surface water from the west drainage ditch were compared to uranium in nearby groundwater wells to determine if a pattern existed which may infer a connection between the surface water in the ditch and groundwater. It did not appear that there was this connection. Secondly, groundwater modeling was conducted to simulate groundwater entering the ditches in order to estimate the levels of contaminated surface water that would result from this. And thirdly, in 2008, the Corps enhanced the environmental surveillance program at Niagara Falls by increasing the frequency of collection of surface water and sediment in the ditches from annual to biannual, the number of sample locations from 7 to 10, and the parameters sampled for to include metals, organic chemicals, in addition to the radionuclide and water quality parameters. Currently, there are 4 surface water and sediment locations sampled in the central drainage ditch on Niagara Falls storage site, 3 in the west drainage ditch, and the remaining 3 in east-west ditches that feed the central drainage ditch. To date, uranium found above background in surface water in the west ditch during the RI sampling cannot be replicated. In other words, uranium in surface water in the ditch as part of the environmental surveillance program remained comparable to background after several rounds. Regardless, the Corps is committed to closely monitoring surface water and sediment in ditches as part of the ongoing environmental surveillance program. One concern raised in the Niagara Falls Storage Site Remedial Investigation Report is the potential impact for former low subsurface utilities on the integrity of the interim waste containment structure. The original purpose of these 1940-era pipelines was to support the former low freshwater treatment plant. As shown in the photos in this slide, when the IWCS was constructed in the 1980s, the United States Department of Energy excavated around buildings that now house radioactive residues to the native confining clay layer and surrounded the waste with compact clay cutoff wall. The purpose of the cutoff wall was to inhibit groundwater from entering or leaving the waste containment structure. In the process of constructing the cutoff wall, the US DOE severed and removed and filled subsurface lines, as shown in the figure to the right. The following weights of evidence on the integrity of the waste containment structure were discussed either in the remedial investigation report or will be discussed in the remedial investigation addendum. The first is the routine sampling, monitoring, and maintenance of the IWCS cap. Biannual sampling of contaminants in groundwater near the IWCS is part of the ongoing environmental surveillance program. Groundwater modeling of potential transport of contaminants from the interim waste containment structure, assuming no protective cutoff wall, which demonstrated protectiveness for 160 years. Limited migration of contaminants due to the naturally confining clay on site. A geophysical survey in the areas north of Building 411 in the IWCS indicate no short-term competency issues such as fractures, depressions, potential voids and caverns that may impact IWCS integrity. The topographic survey, which measures elevations of the ground compared to 1991 as-built elevations. So we compare the 1991 as-builts to the 2009 elevations of the cell to determine if settling had occurred over the past 20 years that could compromise the integrity. Negligible settling was evident. The Corps is committed to closely monitoring the cell as part of the environmental surveillance program to ensure the protection of human health and environment, which is the Corps' #1 mission. And lastly, the potential for plutonium and fission products on the Niagara Falls storage site and adjacent properties was raised as a public comment during the review of the Niagara Falls storage site remedial investigation report. Between 1952 and 1954, spent fuel rods, reactor waste, and combustible material from the Knowles Atomic Power Lab in Schenectady, New York, and animal remains and medical debris from radiological inhalation tests on animals at the University of Rochester in Rochester, New York, were sent to the low. In the later 1950s, a majority of the Capel waste stream was shipped off to the low site to be buried at the Oak Ridge National Laboratory in Tennessee. To address this concern in the RI addendum, the plutonium dataset was supplemented with 17 additional soil samples and 54 soil samples of drummed RI waste from dedicated locations that were analyzed to ensure a greater level of coverage throughout the site. Cesium levels in soil posed unacceptable risk in the RI and will be evaluated further in the balance of plant feasibility study. Cesium found above background in groundwater during the remedial investigation, although below drinking water standards, could not be replicated during the remedial investigation addendum. It is assumed that the detections of cesium in groundwater during the RI may have been a function of turbidity and not representative of the actual concentration available to groundwater at the site. The Corps will continue to consider the potential for plutonium and fission products on the Niagara Falls storage site. However, our current focus for the feasibility study will be on the interim waste containment structure. Thank you for your time, and I'd like to now introduce a new member of our Corps team, Jane Staten. She's the Niagara Falls storage site project engineer.
Thanks, Michelle. I have just a short presentation. What's next? As you know, Michelle explained, the Corps is currently preparing the addendum to the remedial investigation report, which will be available for public comment by the end of this calendar year. Concurrently, the Corps will begin preparing the feasibility study for the interim waste containment structure, which Michelle also talked about. The public will be given the opportunity to review and comment as we progress through the development of the feasibility study. The Corps will first release a fact sheet describing the objectives of each technical memorandum and ask for public input on these objectives. The Corps will consider the comments received and then develop and release each technical memorandum. The public will again be provided an opportunity to comment on each technical memorandum. Responses to public comments will be posted on the project website, and comments will be considered in the development of the feasibility study. The first of these fact sheets is in your handout package and outlines the objectives of the Radon Assessment Technical Memorandum. Public comment is requested by July 23rd, 2010. So, by month. Throughout the process, the Corps will continue to maintain the site, to monitor the air, sediment, and water at the site, and to issue the findings of the monitoring in the annual report. I'd now like to introduce Mick Senes, who will present the Lewiston Porter property sample.
Thank you, Jane. Good evening. My name is Mick Senes. I'm the project manager for the former Lake Ontario Ordnance Works, as many of you know, is the Low site. The Corps is working in conjunction with the Lewiston Porter School Board and their environmental consultant, Joe Gardella. We've developed a sampling strategy within Corps authorities to address concerns regarding any potential impacts from the former activities of the DoD, the Department of Defense, Manhattan Engineering District, and the Atomic Energy Commission on school property. I am here this evening to present that strategy. On this slide, the Lewiston Porter School campus is located in the undeveloped portion of the former Low. The green shaded area in this figure is the former Low site. The outline of the campus is shown on this figure along Creek Road on the left-hand side. Niagara Falls storage site is located within the developed area of the former Low and is shown here in a dashed line in the central portion of the map. The Corps is performing ongoing investigations for Low under the Defense Environmental Restoration Program for formerly used defense sites, or FUDs. The Corps investigations for the Niagara Falls storage site, or NFSS, are performed under the formerly utilized Sites Remedial Action Program, otherwise known as FUSRAP. In other words, FUDS investigates potential chemical impacts from former DoD activities at Low, and FUSRAP determines potential radiological impacts from the former Manhattan Engineer District, or MED, and the Atomic Energy Commission, AEC, activities at NFSS. In August of 2009, the Corps and Lewiston Porter School Board met and discussed data gaps in previous sampling and analyses conducted at school property. As a result, the Corps performed a data gap analysis and developed a proposed sampling strategy to address the concerns regarding any potential impacts from former DOD, MED, or AEC activities on the Lewiston Porter school property. Due to funding constraints, the Corps has historically investigated low in phases. Recently, the Corps developed a management action plan which organizes and presents a summary of the Corps strategy for completing and closing the low site as parcel groups that meet the definition of FUDs under DOD DIRT. Now that the management action plan is available, the Corps plans to close out environmental concerns with respect to past DOD activity by starting with sites with the least potential for environmental impact. Historical sampling and results from previous investigations have identified Lewiston Porter School area as one of those least impacted sites. However, the Corps acknowledges that this site is publicly accessible, so a sampling effort will be conducted within the bounds of our authority under FUDs and FUSRAP. Upon completion of this sampling effort, we will have collected sufficient data to conclude whether the school property has been impacted by past DOD activities. This slide on the screen outlines the recent history of our partnering efforts with Lewiston Porter School. The yellow border outlines the study area for Lewiston Porter School property. The Lewiston Porter campus building and Creek Road are located on the western portion of this map. The north arrow is at the top right corner of the map. A straight orange line that bisects the map from southeast to northwest is what we call the southwest drainage ditch as it flows into 4 Mile Creek to the north. The first part of the sampling strategy involves investigating soil disturbances that occurred during the time that the DOD owned the school property, which was from 1942 until 1945. 1944 soil disturbances identified during historical aerial photo analysis performed by the Corps are overlain in orange on this 2005 photo of the school property. The features identified during the analysis included ditches, depressions, mounded material, trenches, and pits. Upon further analysis and within our authority, the Corps plans to investigate the soil disturbances on the undeveloped portion of the property that are the most suspicious. These locations are shown in red on the figure and include mounded materials not adjacent to the ditch, trenches, or pits. The southwest drainage ditch will be also investigated. I'll discuss that in a moment. The Corps will be using GPS, or Global Positioning System, to locate each of these targeted disturbances. Next, brush will be cleared as necessary to provide access to the locations. The Corps intends to access the majority of the locations via the Occidental property from the east and will clear the brush with mechanical equipment. Hand clearing will be performed when it is necessary to access a location from the school campus. Once brush clearing is completed, the Corps will inspect each location in order to determine if the soil disturbances still exist, estimate the size of the feature, and determine if anything else in the immediate vicinity of the historical disturbance warrants further investigation. Depending on the size of the disturbance, 1 to 4 soil borings will be performed to a maximum depth of 10 feet below the ground surface. The soil borings will be performed with a direct push technology to obtain continuous soil samples. This equipment is mechanized and pushes the samplers through the subsurface. For locations accessed from the campus, soil borings will be performed utilizing hand augers. All soil samples will be inspected for evidence of potential impacts, including staining, discoloration, and odor. Samples will be field screened with an organic vapor monitoring device that detects presence of VOCs or volatile organic compounds. Field test kits will be used to verify that explosives are not present. Finally, the samples will be screened with radiological field instruments for health and safety purposes. Depending on the size of the soil disturbances, field observations and screening results, 1 to 4 surface soil samples and 1 to 4 subsurface soil samples will be submitted for lab analysis for each disturbance location. Sample intervals will be biased towards potential impacts that have been observed or detected. The lab analysis includes volatile organic compounds, or VOCs, semi-volatile organic compounds, or SVOCs, metals, explosives, and polychlorinated biphenyls, also known as PCBs. If radiological measurements exceed 2 times the established background concentration for a soil sample, the sample will be submitted for lab analysis of gross alpha and beta, gamma emitters, plutonium, thorium, uranium, and radium. These photos represent the terrain and land features of the study area as of last month when we walked the site for sample locations. The lower left photo is near the 30-inch outfall where it bisects the southwest drainage ditch. The photo in the upper right-hand corner is one of the soil disturbances located under the grouping of trees in this picture. The second portion of the investigation focuses on the southwest drainage ditch, which flows through the campus from south to north. The ditch was constructed as part of the drainage system for the former low. 6 locations along the southwest drainage ditch, shown here in this figure in blue, will be investigated. The Corps will clear brush mechanically along the east side of the ditch to provide access. For each location, a surface water sample will be collected using a pump. Additionally, a hand auger will be driven manually into the center of the ditch for a collection of sediment and subsurface soil to a maximum depth of 4 feet below ground surface. The sediment and subsurface soil samples will be inspected for evidence of potential impacts, including staining, discoloration, and odors. The samples will be field screened with an organic vapor monitoring device that detects presence for VOCs. Field test kits will be used to determine the presence of explosives. Finally, the samples will be screened with radiological field instruments. The surface water and sediment from each location will then be submitted for lab analysis. The analyses at the southwest drainage ditch also include VOCs, SVOCs, metals, explosives, PCBs, plutonium, thorium, uranium, radium, strontium, and gamma emitters. Based on field observations and field screening results, 1 to 2 subsurface soil samples will be selected for lab analysis from each location. 1 sample interval will be submitted for chemical analysis and 1 for radiological analysis. Sample intervals will be biased towards potential impacts that have been observed or detected. It is possible that the soil interval selected for the chemical and radiological analysis will be the same. On this slide, you will see some examples of equipment that the Corps will utilize to perform sampling at the Lew-Port school property. In the upper right-hand corner is an assortment of augers, hand augers, for collection, soil, and sediments. The other 2 pictures were taken during the Corps investigation at the Low wastewater treatment plant performed last summer. A geoprobe which utilizes direct push technology to collect surface and subsurface soils is depicted in the lower left-hand corner. The lower right-hand picture depicts a soil core undergoing field screening tests. This is the Lew-Port study school schedule for the remainder of this year. First, the Corps will prepare work plans, which will be an addendum to existing plans. The existing plans were developed for the investigation at the wastewater treatment plant last year and are currently available on the Buffalo District's website. The website is listed below on this slide. The work plan addendums are expected to be complete by the end of this month and will also be posted on the same website. The field work is scheduled to take place in late July or August, and data analysis and validation should be complete during September. A technical report will be prepared that will include all field and lab results, along with an explanation and discussion of these results. That report, expected to be completed during November, will also be posted electronically to the website for review. In conjunction with the Lew-Port school field effort, our contractor will be conducting supplemental sampling on the Occidental property to determine the full extent of impacts. Other updates on Low include underground storage tank removal, or UST, from October 2008. This month we received DEC Region 9 No Further Action Memo regarding the post-excavation and geoprobe sample, lab analysis results for the UST removal. The closure report and supplemental closure report will be posted on the web. Also upcoming on Low is a records management project that will catalog more than 3,000 FUDS documents on Low. The final deliverable is expected in the spring of 2011. For the Office of Economic Adjustment, or OEA, safety project, the town of Lewiston is currently getting cost estimates for their portion of the project. For the archive search report, the Corps is reconciling the last of comments made by the Army Corps Center of Expertise. A final report is expected later on this fall. And finally, the Phase 4 RI is currently being reviewed by the Corps, is in the process of providing comments back to the contractor. The final Phase 4 remedial investigation, RRI, is expected at the end of this calendar year. Thank you. I'll now turn the meeting over to Paul Giardina of the US EPA.
Good evening. My name is Paul Giardina, and I'm Chief of the Radiation and Indoor Air Branch of the United States Environmental Protection Agency's Region 2 office in New York. Excuse me. I want to thank both the Buffalo District of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and several of the community stakeholders involved with the Niagara Falls storage site for suggesting I attend and inviting me to this meeting. I'm here to very briefly explain EPA's role in the management of the NFS site under the Formally Utilized Sites Remedial Action Program, as well as our position on the various issues related to the site as we see them. Let me begin by saying my office has had extensive and perhaps unprecedented experience in radium removal and remedial cleanup investigations and operations. By far, the two largest radium cleanups to date were the Radium Chemical Company Superfund removal action, where our agency handled the largest repository of radium used for medical uses back in the 1990s. This involved the removal and disposal of 120 curies of radium. The other radium removal to which I am referring began in the mid-1980s and is known as the Essex County Radium Sites, where EPA removed radium waste left over from near turn-of-the-century radium processing operations. And there, a total of 900 homes in Montclair, Glen Ridge, and West Orange, New Jersey, were remedied over a 24-year time frame. So I point to this experience with pride and believe it's useful for what we face today. And I'd also point out that there are at least 3 people on my staff who've actually participated in these kinds of cleanups for the better part of 35 years, and 2 or 3 others who are pretty close. And I noticed Kent walked in from the state of New York, and he'd probably just say that he knew me when the Dead Sea was only very sick, and that's how long I've been in this business. But anyway, with that perspective, the NFS site contains in what is termed as their interim waste containment structure, or IWCF, about 1/2 of all of the world's supply of processed radium, and it's left over from the nation's early attempts to make nuclear weapons. EPA has been involved with this site since the first day it was designated in the FUSRAP program, when the U.S. Department of Energy was the lead for the program. EPA has maintained and remained involved since the Army Corps of Engineers took over back when mandated to do so by Congress. I am not going to recount the history of our site involvement, but I want to point out that in 1986, when we met with the U.S. Department of Energy, we made it clear that the agency believed that the radium waste, with a half-life of just over 1,600 years, needed protection that was consistent with long-lived hazards associated with this type of waste. We also stated that we believed that the IWCS should be subject to periodic reviews to assure its integrity. Additionally, under the Clean Air Act, EPA has the responsibility as a regulator to assure that the radon that could be emitted from this facility does not pose a threat to human health and that it meets standards. Consistent with our responsibilities under the National Environmental Policy Act, we also need to assure that any final remedy provides the same level of protection as provided by other similar cleanups, and consistent with federal rules and guidance pertinent to radiation protection. So where does that leave us with regard to the issues we face today? I suggest the issues, simply put, are as follows. Next slide. Is the IWCS doing what it is supposed to do now? If it is, will it continue to do the job and for how long? And what should be the final disposition for the IWCS waste? Let me attempt to briefly address each of these issues from EPA's perspective. Yes, the IWCS is doing what it's supposed to do. Radon measurements taken as part of EPA's compliance program for hazardous air pollutants clearly shows the integrity of the cap over the IWCS is performing such that standard levels are not only met, but 2 orders of magnitude below the level. Analytical data reviewed by EPA shows that the 2 other major pathways for a release of radioactivity, a waterborne release from the IWCS to surface waters, or a release through the sides or bottom to groundwater, is not occurring. Such EPA, based on its review of the data, believes that the radioactivity contained in the IWCS is remaining there, and there are no environmental releases that would now threaten human health or the environment. Number 2, will it continue to do the job, and for how long? This issue is more difficult because an end date for its usefulness cannot be established now. EPA believes that the longer the IWCS is used for storage of very large quantities of radium waste, the more conservative should be the yardstick with which its future performance should be predicted. As such, we've commented to the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers that it's recommended that EPA's high-level radioactive waste standards at 40 CFR 191 be considered at least for the storage of such waste. We are also aware of concerns of citizens which want there to be adequate detection system for the IWCS, which would give early warning if the structure began to fail. We've received valuable input from several members of the public, and they have offered some very constructive thoughts, which included enhanced monitoring objectives. And I've personally met and want to thank Dr. William Beck, and Dr. Beck, I see, has come in here, and Professor Joseph Gardella, who is not with us today, for providing us with technical opinions. EPA has taken these and done an on-site review of the situation along with the Buffalo District Office. We've concluded technical expertise from EPA's, we've included technical expertise from EPA's National Air and Radiation Environmental Lab in Montgomery. I anticipate this effort will strengthen what we already consider to be an adequate monitoring system and perhaps make it more accessible to the public. I also want to note that today I met with the 2 people I mentioned before, plus Ann Roberts has given us a memo which we just got today, which we want to look at and add to that, and I think we've already got online to schedule a conference to take those into account. So as you can see, the operative words here are stay tuned. 3. This is maybe the $64,000 question, or maybe the multi-billion-dollar question. The obvious and overarching question is what ultimately should be done with these wastes. From the beginning, EPA has been dubious about any effort for disposal of these wastes on this site. Our experience in dealing with other matters with long-lived radioactive waste, such as at Yucca Mountain, tell us that engineering barriers and institutional controls that would be required for the waste hazardous lifetime are not practical. Remember, this quantity of radium would require controls on the order of 10,000 years. When you realize the United States is 300 years old, I think that establishes why I believe the precedent for engineering controls is inappropriate, or reliance on them, should I say. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, as part of its FOOS responsibilities, doing largely feasibility studies for the site. And EPA has been engaged by the district office on many of the feasibility study issues. We've discussed what standards should be applied. Just a week ago, I've been talking with Michelle exactly about the high-level waste standards. And we've also discussed how likely, as we look at these standards and update them, how they may be more conservative. The district has frequently held discussions with us for the purpose of getting our experience on radium cleanups, as well as issues related to environmental surveillance. We'll continue to do our part, and we believe there's a role for all the stakeholders in finally putting these wastes to rest safely in a fashion that is protective of public health and the environment. I'd like to close with a brief remark about our position on public participation process for the IWCS at NFS. Mike Bazile, my colleague in our Western New York Public Affairs Office, and Mike would you wave your hands? I'm sure they know you much better than they know me. Not only monitors the situation, but attends virtually all of the meetings. Mike and I truly talk constantly on these matters, and we at EPA rely on Mike's expertise as the agency's senior public affairs expert. Mike and I met earlier today with several citizen stakeholders, and I want to reinforce our position on public participation. We believe that everything that can be done to encourage stakeholder participation that is allowable should be done. In working with stakeholders, it is clear to us they have much to add to addressing the issues and ensuring citizens' best interests are served. Additionally, in working with the Buffalo District, we at BEPA believe we're working with a sister federal agency with a high-quality professional technical staff and leadership that is focused on the resolution of these issues. I would challenge those involved with the site, no matter what your role, to channel your passions to find a pathway to work together and move forward. I hope our relationships with the community and the Buffalo District can perhaps be considered a model in this effort. Thank you for inviting me, and I intend now to do more listening. Thanks. I don't know who I'm supposed to introduce. Arlene.
Thank you, Paul. Ladies and gentlemen, if you could now move to the back of the room for the poster session portion of the meeting, we will arrange the front so that we can have the discussion workshop. The posters for Niagara Falls Storage Site are on this side of the room, so the Niagara Falls Storage Site team will be over there. The Lake Ontario Ordnance Works posters are in the back of the room, so the team will be over there. And then Hank is doing a demonstration of radioactive material in the corner. It's on this side of the room, in the back. Thank you. And we are going to move everything, so if you could pick up your folder, yeah, it would be good.
I always try to go up to people okay, and lean jump like 6 feet off. I don't know more than that. Yeah, 5 million. 16 rings.
The nice colors that produce with uranium. They make a black uranium that's a knockout color for jewelry. And then
otherwise you're kind of like, nice game, nice play pickup hockey every so often in winter time, but American Canadians, of course, we don't want to see Americans win. Americans win everything. Yeah, no. They dominate humans, they do.
And what you got to do is you have to look at any kind of uncertainty associated with it. Do they, the report you look at?
Canada, now it's Sweden,